Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Simon with topdockpro, and I hope you guys have been doing well. I hope you've been getting your boats restored and detailed out properly for the summer. Here, busiest time of the year, haven't had a day off in maybe 15 days, so we're putting in the work. We're trying to serve as many clients as possible, and that's what we got going on at topdockpro. Now, I want to make a video today. Like I said, you guys might be restoring your boats, and I really want to talk about Mirka Abralon versus Mirka Abranet. So I have not made a specific video on these two pads, what they're used for, how to run them efficiently, and that's what I want to do today. Let's go ahead and get started. Mirka Abralon. So if you guys have been following the channel for a while, you're going to know that you've probably seen me use these pads in my videos. Not to mention, these are one of the first pads that I started using when I dove into machine sanding. So before that, I was sanding everything by hand. Now, what comes with sanding by hand? Well, first of all, you're gonna put more scratches into the boat. It's gonna take a really long time, and it's just really not efficient, right? So I'm trying to get the best results in the shortest amount of time. That's why I switched over to Mirka Abralon, and that's where I initially began. So let's go ahead and talk about these pads. I'm actually gonna pull one out right now. So Mirka Abralon, which is much different from Abranet because these are foam pads. So these are foam-based pads. They're kind of like a sponge almost. They're really cool, right? Great technology, very cool idea, works perfectly on sanding gel coat, and that's what they were intended for. They are intended to be ran wet. So these pads, they will only work with wet sanding. So you cannot run these dry. If you do, you're gonna cut down drastically on the cutting ability, and it's just not gonna turn out effectively. The pads will get caked up with sanding dust or dead gel coat, whatever you wanna call it, and that will become inefficient. So I recommend you have a hose by your side at all times. Don't use a bottle. A spray bottle with water is not going to do anything. If you're down here in Florida like I am and it's 100 degrees out, that's not going to work out. It's not going to be efficient. So always have a water hose next to you. Rinse down your section before you start sanding. And then when you're done doing your passes, maybe you've done 5 to 6 passes. I usually recommend right around 6 passes. Once you're done with that, rinse down that section again, rinse off the pad. And then, yeah, typically after that, though, you'll want to toss out the pad, get a new one, and continue on. So other than that, let's go ahead and talk about what this is great for and what it's not so great for. So first up, Abralon is getting very expensive. I want to say it's around $4.25 a pad. And yeah, that's quite a lot of money. However, if you are a detailing business, obviously you charge your materials over the client. And I haven't really had an issue with that, so that's not really the problem here. The other thing too is wet sanding, it doesn't cut as fast. So when you're wet sanding, it takes a minute to really grab onto the gel coat and to really start to get to cut, right? So when you're dry sanding, it tends to cut a little faster and more initially, whereas this kind of takes a minute to really get that cut in there, because you're using water, it's a lubricant, it's gonna slow down the cutting process. So something to keep in mind if you're looking for quick results, but you also have to have the right machines. Maybe you wanna opt for dry sanding, which we're gonna be talking about here shortly. I've been using these for so long. Number one, the biggest selling point here is they're safe. A lot of people get scared that they're gonna basically sand through their gel coat, and you can't really get worried about that with these pads. They're super safe. Unless your gel coat is already thin, and this is kind of controversial, but look, if your gel coat is already thin, you've got to restore the boat if you want to look good, or you've got to get it resprayed. So look, if you're not going to get it resprayed, screw it. Sand down the boat. You're not going to damage it much more than it's already damaged. If you want it to look the best and, beat up and look shiny, then you're going to have to wet sand it regardless. So don't let that refrain you from restoring your boat. Right? Your boat gets old, maybe it's 1989 or something like that. It's gonna age. The UV is gonna wear down that gel, and yeah, get it restored. Forget about the thin gel coat and just do it, okay? Now, if you got a new boat, it's nearly impossible to sand through the gel coat on a new boat, guys. On a new boat, a 5-year-old boat, a 10-year-old boat, just really does not happen. There's literally no reason to be scared about it. But if you are, these pads are the ones to go with. because they cut so slow. Now, something else we need to talk about is the proper setup. We haven't talked about any machines yet, so what machine will you want to use? I recommend the Griot's Garage G9 polisher. This is a dual action polisher. A 6-inch is what I would recommend because it will save you time. You get more bang for your buck. When you get the 6-inch pad, you're able to cover more area faster. So don't get the 5-inch, get the 6-inch. And that's how I personally would go about it. Also, you might notice this pad right here that I have. This is an essential pad that you need to have when you're wet sanding with the machine. So this is the Mirka interface pad. This is going to provide cushion for you between your backing plate of your polisher and your disc, which is going to help when you're sanding. So let's go ahead and pull out a machine real quick so I can show you. So check this out. I've got the Griot's Garage G9, the 6-inch random orbital, or really what I would call a dual action polisher. And this is how this works. So you got the interface pad, you got the backing plate. This is gonna go on top of that. So you got your backing plate. Your backing plate is hard and it's not very mobile friendly, so it's not going to bend or twist. This will give you that little bit of cushion that you need when you're wet sanding to kind of compromise for any turns or tilt you have with the machine while you're sanding. And then this is gonna go on top of that. So you can see it's nice and cushioned now. I can pretty much bend it in a little bit. So let's pretend that you're sanding your gel coat on your hull. This is your hull right here and you're sanding. Now, ideally you wanna run that pad completely flat against the surface, but if you do not, if you slightly turn it or, because we're not perfect, we're human beings, this will compensate for that. So that interface pad is necessary to cut down and not eliminate, but definitely reduce pigtails, which comes from a variety of things. Maybe you're running the pad too long, which is why I recommend you do one section at a time, 3x3 foot sections, one time, toss out the pad, get a new one on your next section. If you run these too dry, if you run them too long and they're all frayed up and stuff like that, that's gonna put extra scratches in your gel. So make sure those things are kept in mind while you're doing this. And this is really what Mirka Abralon is about. Let's go ahead and talk about Mirka Abranet. Mirka Abranet right here, this is the other version of pad that Mirka makes, but this one is made for dry sanding. However, you can wet sand with this pad, which I have done in the past. The only limitation you get with this pad, at least from my understanding, is that these only go up to 1,000 grit. So once you break 1,000 grit, that's kind of the end of it, and you're either gonna have to jump into buffing with compound, which technically, if you're using Stark Levelar 800 grit, you sand it with 1,000 grit, you got that 200 grit cushion. Sometimes it's enough, but sometimes it's just not. And I typically would recommend that you finish down further into 2,000, because Abranet, they don't really make a 1,500, so you got to jump from 1,000 down to 2,000. That'll get you that proper bite and proper scratch removal that's fine enough for you to have a lot of success when you get into buffing. Now, besides that, these are dry sanding pads, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about dry sanding. Like I said, you can wet sand them, you can run them with the random orbital, you could wet sand it with 1,000, and then you could wet sand with Abralon with 2,000. But I want to talk about dry sanding today because that's what these pads were specifically designed for. So let me go ahead and pull one of these out. These do look quite different than Abralon. Here we go. This is like a disc. I don't even know what you would call this, but it's a very thin disc and it doesn't have as much potential to kind of break down as Abralon would because it's more of a foam style disc and those grits will break down over time. This one will too, and you also don't want to run your pad too long. You don't want this thing to get frayed up. It will crack, it might tear a little bit, and you don't want to keep running your pad after that happens because, again, we talked about pigtails. You don't want any imperfections in your pad that may lead to pigtails down the road, which are just really aggressive scratches that are quite hard to get out with buffing. They really would have to be taken out with additional sanding. Now, other than that, these pads are a lot cheaper. So I believe that they are under $1 or maybe right around $1 a pad. So $1 versus $4, definitely something to consider. As all of us business owners, we need to definitely consider how much we're spending on products. And so that's kind of a business decision that you have to make if you're a business. I'm always going after the highest quality. So even if I gotta pay a little more in price, I'm not going to decrease my quality just to save better deal or make more profit. That's just not how our business is set up. But yeah, so price point amazing with this pad. And we really got to talk about machines now. So let me go ahead and talk about that. Let me go ahead and grab that machine real quick. So I've got the Griot's Garage G9 polisher. Again, I do have the interface pad right here. The interface pad is always necessary regardless of what pad you're running. That will have to go on first, and that is super important with this disc, even more so than the last one. If you happened to not have the interface pad with the foam pad, the foam kind of compensates a little bit for it, but with this pad, you have to, because this is just a thin disc and this is a hard backing plate, which gives you no mobility whatsoever. So we're gonna put this on here like that. Again, any tilts or turns when you're not running the pad completely flat or something like that, then this interface pad will compensate for that a little bit. So very important. Now, when it comes to machines, I have the Griot's Garage G9. This honestly is not the best machine for dry sanding. So this is where, things become a little tricky. If you want to have a lot of good success, especially when you're sanding a lot deeper into 600, 800 Abranet on extreme oxidation, unfortunately, this machine is just not consistent enough. It doesn't have a perfect rotation such as the Mirka D-Rose sander. So if you get the Mirka D-Rose sander, which I believe is like $500 or $600, that will give you such a better result than this one. So that's where I would kind of shy away from dry sanding if I don't have the proper machines and tools to do so. So I have used this on extreme restorations, 600, 800, 1000 Abranet. Unfortunately, the sand is not consistent enough and it makes it really hard to compound out without adding a ton of additional steps in between the buffing all the way to the polishing. It might be 2 rounds of compound or a compound, a yellow wool pad, a hybrid pad, a foam pad. So we want to cut down on as many steps as possible when we're trying to complete the restoration process. So we don't want to have 8 steps in there. That's going to take forever. We want to have the least amount of steps with the highest quality in the quickest amount of time. That is always the goal. So if you're doing extreme restoration and you need the dry sanding pads, if you don't have the D-Rose, I really would just say forget it at that point. 1000 is going to be your best friend. Like literally, if you are unsure of what's happening or where you should start, you could always start with 1000 Abranet, and then you can actually jump down to 500 Abralon foam pad, foam disc, wet sanding, and then go up to 1000 Abralon, 2000 Abralon. That seems to be one of the better options when you have this machine. So we don't want to machine sand too deep with the Abranet. Like I said, all those challenges arise with the deep scratches until you get a better machine like the D-Rose sander, which will allow you to do anything that you want with dry sanding and have great steps, not too many, buffing, polishing, protection, all that good stuff. So that's my overview after using these pads for about 3-4 years in my business, and I just want to relay that information over to you guys. Now we will talk about one final thing, which is the differences in grit between these 2 pads. Which one actually would have more cutting power? And yeah, by far, Abranet 1000 is going to have way more potential, going to do a lot more damage, going to cut the gel coat faster. And yeah, that is Abranet. Now Abralon at 1000 is going to be way less aggressive. So that's why if you're starting with 1000, let's say we're detailing a pretty oxidized boat, that's why if we're going to dry sand initially with 1000, we can actually jump down to 500 Abralon. That's going to be more comparable. So you got to give about a 500 grit cushion when dealing with these 2 pads, just because this one's going to cut from the start, this one's going to cut a lot slower. So we could go 1000 Abranet, we could jump into 500 Abralon, 1000 Abralon, 2000 Abralon, and that will get you a great result. That's my take on Abralon versus Abranet. 2 great pads to be used for whatever level of oxidation that you have on your boat. And with that said, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to smash that like button so that this video will be promoted to other detailers and boat owners like yourself. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Smash that subscribe button right now, because I release videos on Sundays or Wednesdays, typically on Sundays. If you guys are still confused, want a little more clarity, comment below so I can help you out. Be sure to check out my new course, Total Restoration. It may be out by now, it may not be, I'm not sure, but be sure to check that out on 1%detail.com. And be sure to check out 1% Detail, where you can source the best auto and marine detailing supplies all in one location. We have all our partners on there: Ceramic DNA, Stark Yacht Care, Yacht Stick. And with that said, I will see you on the next video. Peace out.